Today in the show, we have Cyndi Zaweski. Cyndi, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Daniel.
Cyndi, for people who aren't familiar with you, can you tell us who you are and what it is that you do?
Sure. I'm Cyndi Zaweski, and I'm the owner of StoryCraft with Cyndi, and we help solopreneurs and brands tell their story online. Our whole mission is to do storytelling better, and that's what we do here. We talk to a lot of people, and they always are like, "How do I use my story?" And it could do so much more than answer, "Why did I start my business?" or "Why did I start my brand?" Your story is your personality, and it can help you talk about the things that you want to talk about and share with your audience how you help them and make it fun and engaging. So there's a lot of to do with storytelling that just goes beyond the whole, why did you start your business? And that's what we help solopreneurs and brands do.
That's really something I want to dig into and find out more about. So, how does someone find out what their story is? How do they determine what the best thing to talk about is? How do you approach that?
So it depends on what you want your goal for your story to be, but a great way to start coming up with story ideas, what should you tell, is to look at the common enemies that you, and especially if you're a solopreneur or you're making your own content, you're a founder, you're trying to lead out by example. A really great story can show how you lead out by example. And one thing that I like to do with my clients right off the bat is come off with some vision for their brand. Like, what is a shared goal that you have with your audience? If you think about a brand like Nike, their mission, their motto is not just for athletes, but it's really for everybody to get motivated and find that greatness within them. And so much of their advertising and what they talk about on social media and what they do, it all centers around that, right? Like, you look at Nike's social media and you're not going to see a sneaker. You're really seeing those inspirational stories. So that's what I try to do. The first question that I ask is talking to founders about what is the mission beyond the thing that you do, beyond the problem that you solve. And a really great place to start is to look within, right? Like, I think that sometimes we forget how similar we are to our audiences, and you can bleed out but still struggle with the same things like perfectionism and imposter syndrome, packed schedules, hustle culture. There's every great story is a transformation, and it has a conflict in it, a tension, right? What kind of story would it be if they were like the Titanic sailed off and then it sank, right? There's tension, there's like they hit the iceberg. And so like that way of finding a common enemy or something to rally against, that's a really great way to find a connection point, find that tension in your story, and to rally the like-minded people around your vision, your mission.
Okay, so how would you start doing that? Let's say you talked specifically before, I think you mentioned working with solopreneurs. If someone was a content creator, how would they find what sort of thing their followers or community could rally against? Because I like this idea, but how would they actually find something?
Look at your own life. Look at the things that you're overcoming. Look back at your life. Reframe your story. I think a lot of people have a hard time looking back at their life, and maybe they only see mistakes and they only see failures, right? So that makes it hard. But like, when you can look back at your story and look back at those failures and say, "Oh yeah, that was a failure, but I learned X, Y, and Z, and it directed me in this direction that I didn't know." And then all of a sudden, you're coming up with these insights, and you're like, you know what? That situation was terrible and it sucked, but it actually made me the person I am today. And those are little things that you could start like finding your story in. Like, for me, I used to be a news anchor, but yeah, I did. It was one of my first jobs. I was a journalist for 13 years before I started my company. And that's why story is so important to me. Helping people tell their story is so important to me. But I was always so uncomfortable on camera, right? And I was just like, this is something that I have to get better at. And it's also something my audience wants to get better at. So I'm out there and I'm trying different techniques and what's working for me. And now that's a story I tell all the time about how I started to become more comfortable on camera. And I tell the story all the time about how everyone could be a better storyteller. There's from my own life, of course, course, like getting better throughout the years of my career. But also, people like Steve Jobs was not a great storyteller in the beginning. And he went through this whole evolution. He got fired from Apple and he ended up going to Pixar. And when he went to Pixar, that's when he found that love of storytelling. And he said that famous line of the like the smartest person in the room, or like the person in the room that people listen to the most, is the best storyteller. And then of course he went on, and when when that the iPod, yes, the iPod, when the iPod came out, he said it was 1,000 songs in your pocket, and like he started to come up with those lines, and now he's known as the world's best storyteller. But he didn't start that way. Looking back on things that you've changed in your life and really taking an honest assessment and then reframing that, taking back your power from the struggle. Like I tell my audience all the time, I tell my clients all the time, what struggle can you turn into an inspiration story? If you have a struggle, then you have a story, because we tension and struggle, that is at the heart of every story. Overcoming something is at the heart of every story.
I think it's great you use Steve Jobs as an example. You have to find something that you either overcame or some form of tension to build this story. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. Every story is going to need some sort of tension, some sort of rub. That's what makes it interesting. That's why we're glued to our screen. We want to see what happens, right?
And that totally makes sense. I think a lot of the movies that I watch, when nothing happens to the characters, I think this is a very boring movie. But when something dramatic happens, a parent dies, they move, some evil person shows up on their doorstep, right? That's when the story gets good and that's when things get going. So that's a concept I definitely understand. Okay, so in your case, you were telling a story about being a journalist, but being afraid of being on camera. So, how did you overcome that?
So the biggest thing that I've done to overcome that is to honestly, like, what I did was just recognizing that it was a problem. And of course, I was feeling bad about it. And I'm like, wow, I used to be so good on camera. And now I'm like, pretty bad. Like, how did that happen? I actually got worse. And that was something that I had to reconcile. But then again, it's about looking back and be like, I know I'm capable of doing this. And I think one thing that really shows up, and it's even deeper than the storytelling, right? Especially as you're doing your own content and your own creator, right? You might not start out as the world's best creator, and no one does, but you are capable of getting better. And that belief in yourself that you are capable, you might not be good enough now to do what you want to do, but you are capable of getting better and you will improve over time. And I think just that willingness to embrace that suck and just do it and practice. And the way that I did it was I didn't even go on reels or do anything like that. I did it in my stories. I practiced in stories and I would show up in stories, and I still do 2 days a week. I get in stories and I just have a conversation. They're not scripted. I have an idea of what I want to say and I have a conversation with my audience. And that's what's made me comfortable on camera. And that's a great story for me to tell. So now I can go and I can give my tips and tricks of don't script your don't script your videos, because it makes it sound a little bit formulaic, but there are flows to do it, right? One flow that I really love is it's called heart, head, hands. So you start with something emotional, usually something, and again, it's relatable, right? That's why we talk about common enemy is like a relatable character, like a relatable struggle. So people could be like, oh, okay, even though I'm not you, I see where you're coming from. I get that struggle. And then you back it up with some sort of logic, some sort of approach, like whether that's a process or you talk about the science behind it, or you talk about a client example of how you got out of that relatable emotional beginning. And then hands is like giving them something to do, a call to action, something to try at home, where to get more information, if maybe you're doing it for a caption or something like that. But that's just a really nice formula. There are so many different ways to structure a story, but it genuinely follows like that type of structure where you're starting with something relatable, something that people get. You're talking about the deeper impact of that relatable thing. You're trying to get to the heart of it. And then you're giving somebody an action step. They could be the hero of that story. So even though I'm using myself as an example, I'm giving them the tools where they can go ahead and change the narrative for themselves so they become the hero of their own story.
I love all that. Okay, so if I understand, your story was you were a journalist, you were afraid on camera. Over time, you got worse on camera, but you are able to overcome that by using Instagram, going on stories, showing your face, talking about a topic, not scripting it, but just trying to get comfortable and convey an idea by going on stories twice a week. Is that your story? Would you say? I don't mean to minimize it in any way, but I just want to like condense and make sure I understood the beginning, middle, and end of the story.
Yeah, that's one of my stories. And that's like a lot of what I tell my clients. I would say that in that story, like that product that you have now, there was a lot of trial and error in between there, right? Like at first I was scripting things out and I was like getting formulaic and I like had my notebook on my lap as I was trying to do it. And then over time, like I was realizing like, oh, that's actually tripping me up. So then I changed that and I tried a different style. Like sometimes now I just hold the phone in my hand sometimes instead of getting the light ring out and all of that. And again, it's a trial and error. And it's something that we all go through to get better as content creators, as founders. We're always trying something new. And that's such a great thing. Anybody could lead out by example just by trial and error and showing people how they're learning the tools and skills along the way. And all of that is storytelling material.
Interesting. I think we always expect a big success or a big and then we got discovered because of this, or then a famous person showed up at our door or offered us a job or whatever thing. At least that's how I always imagine my success story will end. So I just guess I'll get really vulnerable here for a couple minutes and just how do I figure out what my story is in this case?
So when you're trying to talk about your story, like what like the best way to come up with a story and what we were talking about before is like those everyday stories that you would share on social media, you would share on your stories, but or in a newsletter or something like that. But if you're talking about your brand story, right? This is the one that's going to be on the about page of your website. You're coming back to core messages and what is the thing that you want people to walk away with when they hear your story? What is the best way to think of a story and come up with it is you want to ask yourself these two questions. What is the big takeaway? And that could be like literally 5 to 7 words. You just want a drop the mic takeaway. This is what I want people to walk away with. And also, how is that supposed to make someone feel? What are we trying to make someone feel at the end of reading this story? Should they feel inspired? Should they feel like they found the right place to be? Those are the two things that I want to convey in every story. So, like having those two guides at the beginning, then I know as I'm writing my story, if I'm hitting those two marks, then I know that my story is good.
Fantastic. Okay, so how do I figure out what mine are? So how would I know what my big takeaway is?
Okay, so a lot of that comes back to brand messaging. A lot of that. So we do a lot of that at StoryCraft with Cyndi, like where we are working. A lot of it begins with these brand messages and what are like the big things that you want people to take away from your brands as somebody who's a solopreneur or a founder. The things that I would look to first are like, what do you believe? What are just things that you believe that and they don't have to be like again these like grand things. Like one of the things that I believe is that every struggle is an inspiration story. So a lot of the points that I hit in my brand story and even in the stories that I'm just telling in carousels or newsletters is anyone could become a better storyteller. If you have a struggle, you have an inspiration story. So again, they're like these short lines. They're not I empower women to blah, 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 right? Like they're really things that actually mean something to you. And then it's easy to tell a story because once you have those things that you believe, you can come up with a million examples of that. You won't have a hard time. You're like, I believe that podcasting is the way to help other solopreneurs learn new things. Like now you can start telling stories about like really great speeches and great audio and like why the spoken word matters when you're trying to help other people. We can come up with a million different stories.
Okay, those don't specifically resonate with me because I don't think that is my story. But if I had to guess, I would say that I think my how did you phrase it? My big takeaway is that you don't have to necessarily know everything to be an authority if you either present what authorities have said in a cohesive way that people can follow, or you associate yourself with those authorities by interviewing them or something similar. As long as you're knowledgeable enough to carry on an intelligent conversation with people, and you can, with those authority figures or those knowledgeable people, and you can package that in a way that other people can learn and benefit from, then you too can be an established authority. That's what I would say. That wasn't 5 to 7 words at all. So I don't know how you're going to help me condense that, but that's, I would say, overall, my approach to podcasting and creating content. I don't create the news, but I'm reporting that Instagram just added this feature, TikTok just added this feature. This is getting changed. This is why it's going to help you to grow your audience or make more content, or it's going to be harder to make content now, whatever it is. That's what I'm trying to do, and associate myself with knowledgeable people by asking them to come on the show, finding audio clips of other people who work at Instagram, who work at TikTok, and playing those on the show and saying, this is the reason they're saying this, or this is the context you need to understand what they're saying. And in that way, present myself as an authority. That was way too long. Can you help me condense that to 5 to 7 words?
Absolutely. And you don't have to stick with the 5 to 7 words. Like for me, like when I go to write copy, like I want it tight. So I'm a copywriter as well. Like writing is really like the bread and butter. It's what I do, why I do what I do. I'm a writer. So for me, I would think of something for your situation where expertise isn't a piece of paper. It's experience and adding value. So I think that maybe what those 6, 7 words. But that's a main point that I would want to hit. And so it doesn't always have to be your story, right? Like the person that comes to mind, there are a gajillion examples of this, but I think of people like Rachel Hollis, who doesn't have a college degree and talks all about spiritual growth and personal growth and business growth and self development. And she does that through interviewing people, and she does that through lived experience. Like we said, expertise isn't a piece of paper, it's lived experience and drawing from collective knowledge. So that's one. Joe Rogan is definitely one of those people. His experience was Fear Factor. And now look at the people he's interviewing and look at the impact he has. Like he technically, like, he has no degree or really background to like interview people like Andrew Huberman, but it totally works. It totally works. And I think even like another little story you can get out of that is that you don't have to be the smartest person in the room to be an expert. That's another little nice thing.
I like that. That actually resonates with me a lot. So, how do we jump to the second question, which is, how is that supposed to make someone feel? I don't want to give people the false sense of you can be an expert overnight if you just do this one little thing. That's completely unrealistic to me. It's going to take time and energy and figuring out what the right way is to package your knowledge and present that. But how do I figure out how that's supposed to make someone feel?
I think that gives people hope, right? If they didn't get a college degree in the thing that they want to be an expert in, or they don't have the coolest credentials, or they didn't come from that family, or they don't come from that background, that they could put in the work. It's not denying the work, right? Like even what I said earlier, it's not, you might not be good enough now, but you are good enough to get better. That's something I say all the time. And it's not denying the work, but that is relatable to people. That gives people hope. So maybe that would be a feeling that you want to give people. Like you want to give people hope that the dream that's on their heart is something that could work out for them if they put in the effort.
I like that. Okay. So now that I have these messages, or if someone wants to build their own messages, now they have those answers to the two questions. What do they do next?
So now it's a matter of copywriting, and it definitely takes practice. But again, there's like a whole bunch of different story frameworks, and in my newsletter, I actually share frameworks every week.
I don't say this lately, but your newsletter is fantastic. I don't always read it the second you send it because I want to sit down and digest it, but it's just full of just really great insights. And I don't say that about many newsletters at all. Really love your writing though.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My newsletter is my pride and joy. It's like my piece of the week. I so enjoy sitting down and writing a newsletter every week. So thank you very much. I'm glad that it's well received. But yeah, there's a lot of different kinds of frameworks, right? Like one that I love though is like this status quo. What is life now? Like a lot of really great stories, like when you're thinking about like how to write a story, right? Contrast is really going to help you, especially in short form where you only have so much time to really make that message land. Some contrast between that before and after, that transformation that we talked about, is really helpful. So one great way of doing this, and I think Dan Coe does this really well. He talks a lot about if you don't have a goal, one will be assigned to you by society. And he creates this picture of that's the status quo. People are confused, people don't have clarity, and then they have to go get a 9 to 5, and then they have to listen to society's rules. But if you do, and then that's the status quo, right? And then he talks about why that matters. If you want a life of freedom, if you don't want to have this 9 to 5, if you don't, he paints like that drastic contrast of if you don't want to look back at the end of your life and be like, where did it all go? Then, so then he'll drop into a process. And then that's here's learn skills, whatever his process is, right? And then he'll wrap it up with, again, that action. Here's something that you could do right now to make a step so you don't have that. So that's copywriting, and that really helps too. And I think there's a couple of places that people kind of mess up in stories. One is that they have too much context, like the lead up, it's just too much. So it's almost write out your stories and then get really good at editing. I think really good storytelling is really good editing. So you just want to cut out, like, you don't have to say, my friend Sue down the block. You got to cut it. And when you're trying to make it descriptive, a lot of people will be like, they describe the scenery, and it's not bad. It's just, I'm not talking about writing books here. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about for online writing specifically, where we don't want to go on forever. And like brevity is really kindness in today's distracted world. If you want people to pay attention to you, being able to write succinctly is like really like you're doing your reader a favor if you can give them information that's going to help them very concisely and straight to the point, but still entertaining, right? Some people will just describe things, the terracotta plant pot, whatever. But what we really want to do is get to an emotion. We're not looking to describe the plant in this particular situation. We're looking to say, oh, I felt calm when I looked at that plant. Looking at the plant by the window gives me a sense of calm as I'm writing. So now people are going to take that emotion. And one really great trick for this, I learned it in a book called The Art of Spiritual Writing. But so when you want to convey emotion quickly, what you do is you think of like where you're like what your body does. So like emotions start, like she says, emotions start in the body. So if you touch something and it's cold, it's, oh, the icy door handle as I opened it in the morning to go walk my dog. Then you don't have to say it's cold. Now people get it. Oh, the door handle's cold. I know what that's like. That means like you are out walking your dog at 4 in the morning and it's freezing. People get it. So that's one way to reduce that context by a bodily sensation, because a bodily sensation is a quick way to communicate a feeling.
That book sounds fascinating. I'm definitely going to look into that. And as someone who tends to be a wordy writer who isn't very clear, and I see it in my own writing, that book sounds fascinating.
Okay, so that book is really great. And then there's a book called Smart Brevity. It's by the guys who started Axios, which is a news company. And you wouldn't necessarily think news writing and copywriting, but the way that they talk about it, again, it's like getting to that point without losing the engagement. It's like not being so direct that it's blunt, but being concise in your writing. That book was, it's like, it's literally always like on my desk or somewhere near me because I always look at it for a reference.
I love that. I'm definitely going to look into both of those. Cyndi, this has been great having you on. Do you mind telling us where we can find you online and follow your journey and what we can look forward to you creating in the near future?
Absolutely. So it is cindyzaweski.com. And I would absolutely love for you to join my newsletter. We talk about storytelling frameworks and how to navigate the whole business owner, being the visionary of your business, and then being the person who actually has to implement it as a founder and a solopreneur, which I always find is the trickiest part. Hold the vision and do the daily action. So we talk about all that stuff. We talk about how to do great storytelling there. My handles are StoryCraft with Cyndi. And right now, probably when you're hearing this, it'll be right around when the rebrand is finished and we'll have a beautiful new website. I'm working on some courses. One will be about how to tell your story, not your how to tell your story, not your narrative, like not a plot of your life, but actual story that you could share. And then I'm also doing one where we talk about the things that we were talking before, where we're like, how do we come up with those story ideas by looking at our past? And how do we reframe those situations from our past to make inspirational stories? So those are two courses that are coming out. And I also have a one-on-one services and different ways to work with me. And you can find that on the website.
I will link to as much of that as possible in the show notes so everyone can get there directly without too much effort. Cyndi, this has been so great having you on. Thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, this is such a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Let me tell you a couple things that you should know about me. A product manager but do not have a bachelor's degree. But actually that's factually a fraction of me. Another fraction's posting content irregular and irrationally. Still probably won't get a job at the gram. They forgot, they don't know, or don't care who I am. That's why you never see me at the parties and events. My lack of followers must make me irrelevant. Don't have a course, a book to sell to make a bag of grand. Not a social media marketer, don't represent any brands. Plain to see, don't have an agency, but I got a lot of spam. Just putting in my work without the glitz and glam. Won't catch me eating fish unless it's shrimp or clam. No six pack, no wrist clap, there's a gym card in my hand. Don't have a full-time job, but I got a lot of plans. Stay plotting, dropping knowledge on TikTok and Instagram.
I was trying to remember, how did we get connected in the first place?
Gosh, I don't remember that woman's name now, but I had or you started following me and then I followed you back, or I started following you and you followed me back. And I feel like it's been quite some time that we've been in each other's circle, at least a year. But I feel like we started talking about doing this podcast together when I'm totally blanking on her name, and it sucks because she was really great. But she was talking about the new emails and how you don't want to link out in emails anymore. Newsletters should be like its own complete format. And I was like, yeah, because that's what I do in my newsletter. So I was just interested in what she had to say about that. And I commented and then I started following her and I really liked hers. And that's how this conversation with the podcast started.
All right. I was scrolling back just now and I had connected with Heston and I had asked him, who else should I talk to? And he gave me your name. I think that might be how we got connected. But it's funny because I still have not been able to connect with Heston to get him on the podcast. That's just how the journey goes sometimes, right?
That's so funny. Yeah, I love Heston. He's really great.
I don't feel like I know him that well because we never quite got to connect for the podcast, but his content is really good. So one day we'll make that happen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's really great. I've done a couple of lives with him and he knows his stuff.